There is a silent prison that lives inside you. It was forged not by your choices, but by the touch of time, betrayal, repression, and shame. You were told to forget, but the body remembers. The sacral trauma you carry isn't just emotional, it's alchemical. And until it is faced, you will live a life half-lived, ruled not by your will, but by your wounds. The body is not made merely of flesh, but of memory, ancestral, personal, and symbolic. And within the sacral region, beneath the navel, in the cradle of your creation, lives the most exiled chamber of all. This is the seat of your sensuality, your creativity, your capacity to feel pleasure and grief in equal measure. But for many, this temple has become a crypt. The trauma buried here is not always loud. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it silences. It may begin in childhood, when expression was punished. It may take root during moments of betrayal, where the body was violated or the heart rejected. Or perhaps it was a cultural wound, one that shamed desire, censored art, or taught you to fear the very instincts that define life itself. In time, these unprocessed moments sink into the unconscious, becoming sediment in the soul's inner river. The architecture of sacral trauma is subtle, yet devastating. It doesn't merely lock you in fear. It corrupts your compass. It teaches you that to feel is to suffer, that to desire is to risk disgrace, that to create is to expose yourself to ridicule or failure. You may not even recognize this trauma, because it masquerades well. It wears the mask of chronic fatigue, emotional detachment, low libido, addictive behaviors, artistic paralysis, or a tendency to chase external validation through shallow pleasure. But behind the mask is always the same ghost, a severed connection between your spirit and your body's deepest truth. The world has taught you to dissect the self, to categorize your wounds as psychological or physical, but the sacral center cares nothing for these divisions. It is psycho-spiritual. It is both the water and the reflection, the wound and the portal. Trauma that lives here does not obey the rules of time. It is circular. Something that happened years ago may be lived today each time you attempt to trust, to touch, to speak your truth, to give birth to an idea or a connection. This is not merely a memory. It is a loop. And until that loop is broken, you remain its subject, not its author. The sacral center is also deeply relational. When it is wounded, your relationships begin to orbit around avoidance or control. You might fear intimacy or drown in it. You might become numb, or you might seek high, risk ecstasies just to feel something again. You may become hyper, productive, intellectualizing your way through life to avoid the raw, chaotic realm of feeling. What you do not realize is that your avoidance is not weakness. It is a form of inner loyalty. You are trying to protect the part of you that was once overwhelmed, betrayed, or objectified. But this loyalty becomes a prison when it refuses to release the past. Within ancient systems of alchemy, transformation always began with decomposition. Before the gold, there was always the blackening, the putrefactio. Likewise, sacral trauma must first be exposed before it can be transmuted. But exposure is dangerous without reverence. To merely analyze your trauma is to reduce it to data, but to feel it, to honor it, is to begin the sacred process of remembrance. The sacral is not a weakness to be managed, but a force to be reawakened. And yet, the modern world teaches us the opposite. It tells you to move on, to toughen up, to numb yourself with dopamine and entertainment. It tells you that pain is to be solved, not listened to. But the soul does not speak in solutions. It speaks in symbols, in archetypes, in dreams and urges and sicknesses. And unless you learn its language, you will be forever haunted by what you pretend not to feel. Repression in the sacral center doesn't just block pleasure. It blocks flow, spontaneity, trust in the unknown. Life becomes mechanical, not magical. You begin to live from the throat up, thinking, planning, controlling, while the wisdom beneath the waistline shrivels. But if you are brave enough to descend, to touch the wounds encoded in sensation and silence, you may begin to feel what was once forgotten. And feeling, though it may hurt at first, is the beginning of alchemy. There is a sacred violence in pain. It breaks illusions. And for those who dare to look into the mirror of their suffering, it reveals not weakness, but raw material for transformation. Pain, especially that which arises from unresolved sacral trauma, is not an enemy to be escaped. It is a dark prophet. It arrives clothed in discomfort, shame, aversion, and silence, but beneath its torn robes lies the one truth no modern ideology dares to admit. Pain is the only doorway into the sacred fire of alchemical change. You were not meant to numb it. You were meant to transmute it. In ancient alchemy, every stage of refinement began with confrontation. The shadow had to be faced, the base metal acknowledged. No gold was ever forged without the black phase, the nigridu, the putrefaction. Likewise, the psyche cannot evolve if it is built atop denial. Yet, modern man is trained to flee from discomfort. We wrap our trauma in rituals of distraction, scrolling, shopping, surface level healing trends, never realizing that what we resist begins to rule us. The more you suppress, the more cunning your pain becomes. It will not scream, it will sabotage. It will not confess, it will possess. It will live in your choices, your reflexes, your inability to receive joy, your fear of touch, your disconnection from the sacred dimensions of sexuality and creation. To ignore pain is to deny the sacred contract of your incarnation. You came here to remember something ancient within you, but remembrance demands descent, not into fantasy, but into the real, into the grit, the ache, the raw, unsanitized history buried in your sacral vault. This trauma may not have words. It may be ancestral, one born, absorbed during formative years, or carved into your being through betrayal and abandonment. Still, it lives, it pulses, and it alters the chemistry of your inner world. Ignoring it is like pouring perfume over rotting wood. Externally fragrant, internally fractured. There are two types of people: those who run from the shadow, and those who dare to dine with it. Those who run may appear more functional, but functionality without authenticity is the most dangerous illusion. It leads to hollow success, pleasureless pleasure, relationships that are transactional, creative works that lack soul. It leads to a life well packaged but unlived. The shadow, particularly when anchored in the sacral domain, becomes your hidden tyrant. It drains vitality, perverts instincts, and slowly convinces you that safety is found in control, when in truth, safety is found in surrendering to the full spectrum of your humanity. What the alchemists understood, and what most psychological paradigms have forgotten, is that transformation is not intellectual. You cannot think your way into liberation. You must feel. You must descend into the underworld of your being with the eyes of a mystic and the resolve of a sovereign. The emotions you fear the most, grief, rage, shame, longing, are not signs of dysfunction. They are keys, but only if you know how to hold them. To face the shadow without reverence is to re-traumatize, but to face it with presence, breath, ritual, and symbolic understanding, this is when the magic begins. Pain is the crucible. The sacral shadow is not an aberration. It is the doorway. That which you suppress becomes your fate. That which you integrate becomes your fuel. You are not here to eliminate your scars. You are here to remember that even the wound can become a womb for something sacred. But only when you stop hiding from it. Pain cannot be cured because it is not a disease. It is a rite, a trial, a whisper from the unconscious that says, something is ready to be born, but first, something must die. The death of numbness, the death of false identity, the death of the belief that healing is soft and painless. True spiritual alchemy demands blood, sweat, and soul. It demands that you weep not because you are broken, but because you are being reformed through fire. Most do not reach this stage because it requires a betrayal of the ego's comfort. It demands silence where you once sought noise, stillness where you once clung to motion. The moment you agree to feel your pain, truly, not just performatively, you declare spiritual war on every lie you've been told about strength. Pain, when embraced, becomes the philosopher's stone, and through it, your sacral energy, long held hostage by repression and fear, begins to rise not as chaos, but as power, refined, rightful, and relentless. The body is not a machine, and it is not merely a vessel. It is the living grimoire of your soul, a sacred text written in tension, breath, bone, and sensation. In the ancient art of alchemy, the philosopher's stone was not only a literal transmuting substance, it was a metaphor for what occurs when base elements, raw, impure, and unrefined, are brought into sacred union. The modern mind, addicted to abstraction and analysis, has forgotten that the body is this very stone. And when it comes to sacral trauma, no transformation is possible until the body itself is invited back to the throne. Pain that resides in the sacral center is not a theory. It is not a memory you think about. It is a weight you carry in your hips, a clenching in your pelvis, a disconnection in your lower spine, a stiffness in your gait. It is the subtle flinch when someone touches you kindly. It is the ache that lingers after an act of intimacy that felt empty. It is the numbness that replaces the fire of passion. These are not psychosomatic accidents. These are sacred symptoms, messages encrypted in muscle, fascia, and breath. You cannot talk your way out of sacral trauma. You must walk your way through it. You must descend, not into story, but into sensation. In a world obsessed with the cerebral, most people are taught to dissociate from their bodies, to live above the neck. Thought is worshipped, sensation is distrusted. But what is the body, if not the temple where all your forgotten prayers echo back to you in the form of fatigue, dis-ease, or craving? The sacral center, located in the region just below your navel, is not just an energy point. It is your axis of pleasure, movement, intimacy, and emotion. It holds the blueprint of how you relate to your environment, to others, and to your inner world. When trauma strikes this area, especially sexual, creative, or emotional violations, it becomes a silent war zone. But the war does not end when the event does. The body locks it in. The tension remains. And until it is addressed, it will speak through dysfunction, through stagnation, through perpetual cycles of fear disguised as comfort. The only true alchemy begins with embodiment. You must stop treating your body as a cage or a tool and begin treating it as a sacred mirror. When you tremble during breathwork, when tears erupt during yoga, when anger surfaces during pelvic stretches, these are not coincidences. They are eruptions of trapped life force, begging for release. There is no correct way to process such energy. The body knows, but it must be given permission to speak, to scream, to sob, to shake, to move in ways that do not conform to the polished standards of controlled behavior. That raw movement is the dance of resurrection. To reclaim the sacral center is not to repair a damaged part of yourself. It is to retrieve a stolen crown. You were born into a body that was never ashamed of its rhythms. Children move freely, moan when they're tired, cry when they're overwhelmed, express desire without guilt. But through shame, punishment, and repression, that wild honesty was severed. You learn to sit still, to smile politely, to deny discomfort, to perform. This performance becomes chronic, and it is this chronic betrayal of the body's truth that keeps the trauma frozen. The key lies in sacred reconnection. Breath is the bridge. Movement is the language. Stillness is the listening. When you begin to breathe deeply into your pelvis, when you sway your hips like tides returning to the moon, when you allow yourself to cry without censor, you are not being dramatic. You are engaging in ancient medicine. The body begins to thaw. The numbness begins to soften. The fire of suppressed desire begins to flicker back into life. This is not mere exercise, this is invocation. True embodiment is an act of rebellion. In a culture that profits off your disconnection, choosing to feel is radical. Choosing to move is revolutionary. Choosing to listen to the whispers of your hips, the pulse of your belly, the truth behind your tremble. This is how you take the sacred science of alchemy out of dusty books and into your living, breathing temple. The body was never your prison. It is the stone you must heat, the vessel you must cleanse, the scripture you must learn to read not with your eyes, but with your presence. When you do, the sacral trauma that once ruled you becomes the very fire that reshapes you into something sovereign, sensual, and spiritually unbreakable. The wound speaks in symbols. It does not respond to reason, to logic, or to the sterile methodologies of the clinical mind. Sacral trauma is not a problem to be solved. It is a force to be transmuted, and transmutation belongs not to the intellect, but to the realm of ritual. In the ancient world, when pain was encountered, it was not dissected under a microscope. It was honored in fire, danced into the ground, wept into sacred rivers, burned into incantations and earth-bound ceremonies. Rituals were not superstition. They were spiritual technologies. codes that unlocked the inner sanctum where trauma had taken root. This understanding has been buried under centuries of mechanistic thinking, but it still lives in the bones. The body remembers. The spirit remembers. The question is whether you are willing to remember. Spiritual alchemy demands participation. It is not a spectator sport. It begins when you stop outsourcing your healing to systems that see you as a collection of symptoms, and instead enter into direct communion with your own inner underworld. The sacral center cannot be liberated by thought alone. It must be seduced, and invited back into trust. And that trust is earned through symbolic action, breath, movement, sound, touch. These are not frivolous gestures. They are sacred spells when done with intention. The first ritual is breath. Deep, conscious, directed breath. Most people breathe like they are apologizing for existing. Shallow, tense, restricted. But the breath is the chisel that carves through stone. To breathe into the pelvis, the hips, the sacral bowl, is to knock on the door of buried memories. With each inhale, you signal safety. With each exhale, you soften the grip of years of suppression. Eventually, something stirs. Emotion rises, heat, sadness, rage. Numbness gives way to sensation. This is not breakdown. This is initiation. The second ritual is movement. Not rehearsed choreography, but primordial, instinctual movement. The hips must spiral. The spine must undulate. The body must be allowed to express its own sacred geometry. Trauma freezes energy, but movement unbinds it. Shake, rock, circle. Let the pelvis become the drum of the earth. Let the sacrum become the serpent rising. Dance not to perform, but to resurrect. The body holds what the mind cannot process. So let the body speak in its own language, without the censorship of elegance or politeness. This is not performance art. It is resurrection art. The third ritual is sound. Uncage unapologetic sound. Moans, growls, sighs, sobs. These are not signs of madness. They are the forgotten songs of the soul. The throat and the womb are twin gates. What is trapped in the sacral will often stay stuck until it is voiced. Sound clears what words cannot touch. Chant. Hum. Scream into a pillow. Whisper to your inner child. Let sound become the sword that slices through years of silence. You are not here to be quiet. You are here to be clear. Another powerful ritual is symbolic release through elemental offerings. Write the name of your wound on paper and burn it, watching the smoke carry the memory upward. Bathe in salt to cleanse residual emotional debris from the skin. Anoint your lower belly with oil, tracing sacred circles while affirming your return to creative sovereignty. Create a personal altar with symbols of water, fire, and the feminine principle. This is not to be trendy, but to reawaken the archetypal intelligence within you. The subconscious responds to symbols more than speeches. These rituals bypass the gatekeeper of logic and enter the sacred vault of the unconscious, where true transformation begins. Words also have ritual power when spoken not as explanations but as spells. Speak to your body daily. Whisper forgiveness to your younger self. Repeat phrases like, I reclaim my right to feel. Pleasure is sacred. My body is my temple and my truth. These are not affirmations. They are reclamations. They rewire the nervous system not through force, but through sacred repetition. The sacral trauma is often layered, intergenerational, ancestral, personal, but it can be softened through ritual action, not overnight fixes. You must also understand the importance of rhythm. Rituals are not one-time miracles. They are cyclical, lunar, feminine in their intelligence. Healing is not linear, and neither is transformation. There will be days when the energy flows and days when the wound whispers again. But through sacred consistency, you show the inner child, the inner feminine, the wounded warrior within you, that you are no longer abandoning them. This is the essence of spiritual transmutation. It is not about pretending the wound never existed. It is about turning the wound into a portal. A ritual is the key that opens that portal, and with each breath, each movement, each sacred act of presence, you step further into the temple that was once a tomb. Desire has been exiled, cast out like a heretic from the cathedral of the soul, ridiculed as sin, feared as chaos, hidden beneath layers of guilt and discipline. In its place, obedience was enthroned. Obedience to systems, to roles, to mediocrity masked as order. But desire, true desire, The flame that rises from the depths of the sacral well is not the enemy. It is the forgotten deity of your becoming, and to reclaim it is not to regress into hedonism, but to step into your sovereign fire with both hands open and your spine upright. When sacral trauma is unresolved, desire becomes distorted or dormant. Either it turns volatile and compulsive, seeking to fill an inner void with superficial cravings, or it disappears altogether, buried under numbness and fatigue. But when healed, desire is no longer a scream or a silence. It becomes a sacred roar, calm and commanding. The sacral center is the throne of this fire. It governs not only sexuality, but creation itself, your art, your movement, your hunger for life, your ability to imagine and initiate. To repress this center is to turn your temple into a tomb. The world teaches you that desire is a thing to be controlled, moralized, or managed. But ancient wisdom knew better. The alchemists and mystics saw desire not as temptation but as signal. It was the compass of the soul, the divine spark that moves one from stasis to transformation. You were not meant to kill desire. You were meant to sanctify it. What must be understood is that unhealed sacral wounds sever the connection between desire and divinity. Trauma convinces you that to want is to risk pain, that to move toward what you love is to invite betrayal or punishment, so you shrink. You become efficient, obedient, logical, but no longer alive. The body becomes a vessel of survival, not celebration. Creativity becomes labor. Pleasure becomes transactional. Connection becomes performance. The holy heat of desire is replaced by the cold repetition of routine, and yet under it all the flame still flickers. Waiting, watching, wanting to be called back. To reclaim desire, you must confront everything that taught you it was dangerous. Every doctrine that labeled it sinful. Every adult who told you to sit still when your body wanted to move. Every lover who took without honoring. Every moment you silenced your joy because it made someone else uncomfortable. Desire must be grieved before it can be reborn. It must be welcomed back like a prodigal god, fierce, wild, sovereign. Not tamed but trusted. Desire is not just sexual, it is elemental. It is the longing to create, to speak truth, to dance without choreography, to touch the divine in another's eyes, to birth a vision, to be seen as you are. It is not chaos, it is cosmos in motion. The repression of desire is not morality, it is bondage disguised as virtue. True virtue is not suppression but direction. When you heal your sacral energy, desire no longer controls you because it no longer terrifies you. You learn to ride its current rather than drown in it. You learn to let it speak without shame. You begin to listen, not to what is expected of you, but to what you truly long for in your bones. The alchemical power of sacral healing lies in this shift. You no longer seek from lack, you create from fullness. You no longer chase what you don't believe you deserve. You magnetize what mirrors your worth. When desire is returned to its throne, you do not become a slave to appetite. You become a steward of sacred fire. You can be sensual without being lost, powerful without being cruel, magnetic without manipulation. Your presence begins to radiate from the core, not from performance or perfectionism. Others may not understand it, but they will feel it. This is what it means to reclaim desire as divine fire. It is to walk as one who remembers that the body is a prayer and desire is its flame. It is to make love, not just with bodies, but with existence. It is to stop asking for permission to feel, to want, to create, and to begin living in such a way that every step you take becomes an act of alchemy. The healed sacral energy is not quiet. It pulses, it radiates, it builds. It becomes the force that animates purpose, love, and vision into one stream. When your sacral trauma is released, and your desire is restored, you are no longer a shadow of what you might become. You are the flame itself, incarnate. You were never meant to walk this earth dimmed, dulled, and disconnected. The fire in your womb, the current in your hips, the tremble in your breath, these were not design flaws. They were signatures of something divine encoded into the fabric of your body. Sacral trauma is not just a wound, it is a theft. It steals your trust, your pleasure, your power to create and connect. But it does not have to be the end of your story. When you stop running from the ache and begin to enter it, reverently, ritualistically, with fierce tenderness, You reclaim the throne that was always yours. Healing the sacral center is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to what was buried beneath years of shame and survival. You do not need to be perfect, pure, or perpetually peaceful to heal. You need to be honest, present, willing to feel again, willing to descend into the molten core of your being and rise not cleansed of pain, but crowned by it. Your body is not a battleground. It is a temple. And when you choose to feel it fully, to honor its rhythms and release its ghosts, it becomes the very philosopher's stone that transmutes suffering into sovereignty. There is a sacred fire sleeping in your sacral chamber. It is ancient, it is holy, and it is waiting, not to be managed, but to be remembered.